Check the day and check the recruiting ranking, and Notre Dame's either number 1 or number 2. They flip-flop, it seems, by the day with Ohio State. Not that it much matters. If you come in one of those two positions, I think you're going to be doing just fine for 2023 and beyond. We got John Kennedy on the line from Always Irish. Good to see John here
Mark,
to talk up Notre Dame football. John.
it's so good to be back with you. It's been a while. Life's been busy, but we need to catch up because I feel like there's been just a few things that have popped up in Notre Dame land that may be of interest, not only to myself and you, but everybody else as well. So we have some catching up to do, Mark.
Yeah, let's get down to it. Here we go, and I'll kind of stay out of the way. Well, you not only have a different head coach, he is a very different head coach than the previous head coach who is now down at LSU. So Marcus Freeman, all you have to do is look at the recruiting rankings and you would see, okay, he's off to a great start. Maybe just about everybody outside the state of Ohio would tell you right now that's been offended by some of Marcus Freeman's words would tell you, we love having Marcus Freeman. This is the best hire possible. He's going to be a superstar.
It's interesting. You know, when you look at this, here's the easiest way I could put it. The reason, even though Brian Kelly had a string of 10-plus wins, playoff appearances, all of that, the reason that there were people in Notre Dame land that were ready to look at going another direction was, for whatever reason, and as much accomplishments as Kelly had in Notre Dame, he never quite recruited elitely enough, often enough to get over the hump when you're in that playoff game or the COVID year to beat Clemson healthy with Lawrence back in the ACC title game. So to the outside, a lot of people are going, you're nuts for being happy about this. You just lost the guy at Notre Dame that was winning 10, 11, 12 games a year, all this. I get that, but this is Notre Dame. And we're looking beyond that. And it just seemed like we kept bumping up against that wall. You're beating all the teams you have more talent than. And then the same exact result that looked the same kept happening in every one of those biggest moments. Then you're hearing from the people around that know Kelly's just not that aggressive in recruiting. He's just not doing what it takes, taking the extra step, build these relationships, get the elite of the elite guys interested in Notre Dame. All of that over the last few years, you're just hearing, you know, I ask about a great quarterback. Well, the kid said Kelly barely talked to him when he was on campus. You're not going to land him then. Okay? All of that started building up. You have that same big game result over and over again. And then we get to the point where one day on Twitter, Kelly's going to LSU out of nowhere. And my first thought is, I love it only if it's Marcus Freeman. I ain't interested in Luke Fickell. No. I loved it even before the hire, as long as Freeman was going to be the hire. So I realize that's risky, Mark, because Marcus Freeman has no body of work as a head coach. None. And that's risky. Marcus Freeman is a high upside play, developmental coach with elite recruiting as the engine that is going to drive that operation. Notre Dame's in a unique position. One thing Kelly did do the last handful of years, that stable's culture, the culture is stable as it gets. You can only go down this path with a guy at Notre Dame with no experience if you have that stable infrastructure in place. So Notre Dame found themselves in a unique window of time with a lot of stability and a lot of good things going on. And it just all worked out. But when you're looking at those choices, it was Marcus Freeman one. No one else was on the list. No, like reasonable. Saban could come, reasonable. No, it was Marcus Freeman or Always Irish shuts down and I do something else in the basement. That was it. So it had to be him, and I'm glad they didn't overthink it, and they ran with it. And so far, the recruiting's been fantastic, spectacular. Love everything about it.
Absolutely, it has. And to put it in one statement, it would be the difference between, for as good as Brian Kelly was and as much as he upgraded the recruiting, it would be the difference between him making excuses for being at Notre Dame and the academic requirements being in the way, as Marcus Freeman saying, this is a reason why we should have elite recruiting, is that we can sell the school as an elite school against its competition in that way. So glass half empty, glass half full. It's Marcus Freeman versus Brian Kelly. Has there been anything besides the recruiting results to date that have sold you on Marcus Freeman and have shown that this is going to be the hire that you're expecting it to be?
Yeah, and that's tricky. Want to wrap up the recruiting angle of it and then move on, because your question is a great one. When you're looking at the last handful of cycles of the Kelly era and his recruiting, you're looking at a 52 to 55% average blue chip recruit rate, okay, over the last few cycles. If you're looking at 23 and what we got in 24, Freeman's up near 87%. That is a huge, huge talent difference gap. And then you look at what Kelly was able to do with lower talent and how close he was able to get. And you look at that 87% blue chip rate. That is not a slight difference. That's a major talent upgrade across the board. We could be frustrated about Dante Moore going to Oregon. We could do all that. And there is some frustration. But overall, the talent is just, the floor's being raised and what we're getting on the top end's being raised. So that is notable and a huge deal.
And John, before you do move on with Marcus Freeman, one more note on the recruiting that a lot of people don't necessarily see in the rankings, that the rankings places are not created equal. The distance between 1 and 5 isn't necessarily the same as between 5 and 9 and on down the line. For example, I was looking at Ohio State and Michigan from a year ago in 2022. Distance in the recruiting rankings was number 4 versus number 8. Well, if you look at the ratings points, they start to cascade down quickly. And so the distance between that 4 and 8 was the same as the distance between 8 and 24. So on the Notre Dame and Brian Kelly part of this, he was recruiting basically where between about 7 and 12, correct? Pretty much.
Yeah, somewhere in that ballpark.
So
yeah,
that,
I think
that sounds like you would be able to take the 7th or 8th or 9th best class in the nation repeated 4 years and say, you should be able to win with that and win big and compete for a national championship. But that's not the, the top 3 class, 4 class in the nation level. It's like the difference again between like number 3 and 25. There's a noticeable difference.
Yeah, and I did some research on some of those recruiting numbers as well. And in recent vintage, what I learned is the teams that win championships usually have multiple classes right around the top 5 or better for a couple classes leading into the year they win. That seems to be a requirement to win a title, with 2 exceptions: Cam Newton and Lawrence. If you have the best quarterback in the country on your team, you can afford to have little lower level talent spread out everywhere else. Other than that, you got to be in the top 5 or right around it for multiple cycles. That's just what the results say when I look at who wins and what they did leading into it. So it's Kelly did okay, fine, really good, very good. Just couldn't quite push it over that hump. And we're hoping this will be different. But that 87% blue chip rate's outrageous. It's what we've been begging for. All those it's too hard to recruit to Notre Dame, Brian Kelly excuses. Marcus Freeman's first class at Notre Dame is going to be higher rated than anything Brian did in 12. And not that much has changed institutionally. You still got to be able to read and write and get in. So it was an effort thing, Mark. They asked C.J. Carr, Lloyd's grandson commits to Notre Dame. That warms my heart, by the way, in a unique way. But they get C.J. Carr. Pete Sampson interviews him and says, You were in South Bend a couple times last year for a camp and then the USC game. What was your relationship with Kelly like? Barely saw him when I was in town a couple minutes. Don't really know the guy. There wasn't much there. That's not going to work at Notre Dame. It's never going to work at Notre Dame. You're not going to land the elite of the elite when your head coach just isn't that involved. Okay? It's not going to happen. So you translate that over to your question to me about Marcus and what else we like. The entire vibe's different, Mark. I went over to the blue and gold game, first time on campus since all this has changed. It's a new energy, a new vibe. It's modern, energetic, a little less stuffy. It's genuine. And that's a big sticking point with Notre Dame people. Nobody ever knew if Kelly was being genuine. Marcus, he's almost too genuine. He almost tells you too much of the truth sometimes. That genuine feel and vibe has permeated everything. There's a new energy, a new excitement. Everything's modern. The recruiting is way more modern. Instantly, there were creative new recruiting angles that were never going to happen under Brian Kelly ever. So Marcus comes in, new energy, new vibe. He's taking those historical negatives that are recruited against Notre Dame, spins them into positives, uses them. He requires the staff to be obsessed with all this too, and they're all in. It's just a totally different vibe, and it just feels a little more open, a little less stuffy, and a little more youthfully energetic. And I think that's what this program could use in the near future.
Got John Kennedy on the line. Always Irish. Get on over there right here on YouTube. Check out his work. And not too early to talk about Ohio State in Columbus week 1. So we're just about 7 weeks away, something in that range. So the Vegas pundits have tabbed you about a 2-touchdown underdog in that one. But you know what? That's not going to matter once they kick the ball off. So your initial thoughts about this one?
This is such a tricky spot, right? I've been saying on my show, you know, Freeman coached in the bowl game when everything was in transition and the staff was in transition and all that, and they lost that ball game. I've been telling people this is not something you would usually hear from my show. This guy could start 0-2 at Notre Dame, and I'll still love him and think the future's brighter than anything I can remember since Lou Holtz retired. And I mean it. And I mean it. So with Ohio State, complicated for Marcus. That's his alma mater. There's all those feelings. They don't like some of the things he said that I think they need to get over it. That program should be past worrying about him trying to pitch Notre Dame's academics and stuff. But anyways, I think all the pressure's on Ryan Day. He's the one with the established program, with the top 5 talent, with the good quarterback, all those toys, a wide receiver, a great running back at home. Okay. Mad you lost to Michigan to end the year. To me, all of the practical pressure for this year is squarely on Ryan Day to make sure the team that's a little further down the path here takes care of business and does what they got to do. That's my opinion. Now, here's where I'm going to have an issue. I'm going to have an issue because you know how fans are. Half this fan base, if they don't beat Ohio State's going to go, see, John, your guy's a fraud. He's a good talker, good recruiter, can't coach. Get him out of here. You know, I know that's coming if that ball game doesn't go our way. Here's my response to that, Mark. I've been telling people this. People are quick to forget that the exact same reason many of us were ready for Brian Kelly to go somewhere else, that reason is now Marcus Freeman's problem week 1 at Ohio State. Not enough elite talent spread out enough to win those games. That problem was not instantly eliminated just because Kelly moved to a swamp. It's not. So there's some perspective here and some nuance, in my opinion. I've been telling people, if you don't have the horses, blame the guy at LSU. Give Marcus 2 or 3 cycles to build this out his way with his talent. And then we'll see where we're at then a couple cycles down the road. I think the risk to Notre Dame is the only thing, in my opinion, that could derail this recruiting is if Notre Dame tanks that game and then loses some others that they shouldn't. They have more talent then, and they lose a few. That's where I'm interested to see if that hot recruiting tapers off. But Ohio State itself, that's just a tough spot. And there's going to be a lot of narratives that are premature either way that goes.
Absolutely. And I certainly would gobble up the 14 points myself. I'm not saying that Ohio State's not capable of covering the spread. Of course they are, but those teams could get out there 100 times. I'm just about going to guarantee Notre Dame's going to cover the spread more than they're not of 14 points. This is, despite the talent that was acquired by Kelly that's currently on the roster not being elite or being good enough to win the whole deal, this team's still going to be one of the 10 best teams in the country, correct?
Yeah, they are. I do think this schedule is a lot tougher than the last couple years. And I know Notre Dame's schedule is always a big thing people want to debate. Opening at Ohio State's no picnic, but you also do have Clemson, upstart, USC. Okay, those are 2 big ball games. You got BYU and Vegas. I think that's going to be a lot trickier than Notre Dame people want to make it. So I do think the schedule is a little tougher this year than the last couple. You're also breaking in a brand new head coach, a mostly all brand new staff. By the way, a new quarterback. We have about 3 wide receivers on the roster that are going to be able to play. So there's just going to be a lot of moving parts. Week 1, there's always a little bit of inherent randomness to week 1. Who sleepwalks into it? Who comes out ready to go? Sloppiness. You don't know what's going to happen. But it's a tough assignment week 1 at the Horseshoe. So there's no see how it goes against Central Michigan and then we'll move on. No. So you got to be ready right away. I could see that game going a bunch of different ways. I really could. And it's just kind of wait and see, I guess. How do you see that? What do you feel about this matchup?
Well, I think it's going to be a better game than certainly the Ohio State contingent. So we hear from all, I know that all sorts of fan bases drop in on your channel as well, but obviously there's a concentration on Notre Dame fans versus I'm hearing from everybody. Here's the basic breakdown of the Notre Dame fan, the Ohio State fan, and everybody else. The Notre Dame fan is basically optimistic to say, we don't expect to win, but we think we can win. Certainly think we can go in there and win the game. Shoot, we're only 9 months removed from Oregon going in as a 15-point underdog and winning in Columbus. So we can do it, but we should be able to go in there and compete. We expect to compete. We probably will lose, but we expect to stay within a touchdown to 10 points and it to be a really good game. The Ohio State fans are generally just off the rails, throwing out 56-17 scores and stuff like that. And then you've got your average college football fan, at least the ones that comment to my channel, that seem to be in that, Ohio State wins this game by a couple touchdowns.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I get it. I understand why the Ohio State people are excited. I mean, that offense is explosive and loaded, and all it takes is one play and they're behind you. I get all that. But like you referenced, it's not like this is Marcus Freeman taking over a program that just got burned to the ground and is rebuilding a culture and having to establish stuff. Like I'm not saying that the talent was terrible under Kelly. It just wasn't elite of elite. I think the only thing Notre Dame needs to avoid, if they stay within a touchdown or 10 points, nobody's going to go, oh, look at this horrible team, whatever. They just have to avoid a nightmare where it all goes wrong, everything, just new coaches and new quarterback, and it just kind of goes off the rails. All those people at the Horseshoe been drinking all day. It's loud, and it just all goes down the crapper. I mean, I I have too much scar tissue from Brian Kelly in those ball games. But I agree with you on the Notre Dame take. Yeah, we think we can hang in there. There's no doubt to me, Ohio State's a more established program right now. At home, on paper, they should win the ball game. But it's football. It's not played on paper. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. If they lose and it's not embarrassing, I'm not going to have a panic attack over it. I'm not. It's week 1, year 1, game 1 with the other guy's talent that nobody thought was good enough. That's how I look at it, really.
The major legitimate concern for Ohio State is that the defense was bad for most of 2021. Jim Knowles comes in from Oklahoma State. He's an exceptional defensive coordinator. There is no reason for Ohio State's defense to be anything close to what it was last year. That's unthinkable based on having 3 5-stars just in the defensive line. So it's unthinkable. However, cautionary tale, Jim Knowles improved the Oklahoma State defense and raised it to a top 5 unit. It took him 4 or 5 years to do that. They actually regressed his first 2 seasons at Oklahoma State before he finally improved the defense. They don't have preseason games. It's not the NFL to work the kinks out against live action. This is going to be a testing ground for an Ohio State, a new Ohio State defensive scheme with the bullets flying week 1.
Yeah, and I mean, Notre Dame's best path to victory here, or to keep a 1-score game late in the game, is making their defense their offense. Be able to run the ball, be able to eat up. Every minute you got the ball is another minute. All of those exciting offensive players they have aren't out there, okay? So I think Notre Dame really does it. Last year, that offensive line held Notre Dame back. It took them through half the year to be able to even function, which is a rarity in Notre Dame offensive line play recently. Injuries, they had issues. We expect this line to be able to perform early and often. And so Notre Dame's best path here is to be able to keep that ball, move it down the field, eat up some time, put some points on the board. That's going to be their clearest, best path to keep this game close. And then use some of that Michigan template. Hutchinson went crazy pressuring that quarterback, and they weren't able to use all those great wide receivers to win that ball game. So run the ball, eat up some time, and then defensively, Notre Dame's got a really strong defense and defensive line. We expect to disrupt. That's your recipe.
Ohio State, Notre Dame, 2 of the giants in the sport, of course, right now and historically. They get together very rarely. 95-96, the last 2 games in the regular season against each other. Is this the start of a series as league members? Of course,
I was going to say, I think I know where this is headed.
Yes. Will this happen? Should it happen? Where are you on all that?
So I like your segue there. That's a professional move by you. Good move there, Mark. The other reason the Notre Dame Ohio State opening game is very intriguing now is not only like you're talking about maybe a potential in conference situation, but Notre Dame and Ohio State are overlapping for a lot of top talent on the recruiting trail now. They're going after a lot of those same guys. Last week, Jason Moore, great defensive lineman. Notre Dame was second in that battle. Thought they were going to land him a long time. So that's the other reason this ball game's interesting is there's a lot of overlap there in those recruiting battles. And who knows if those kids are going to look at that game and help it inform their decision. So that's an interesting overlap with Notre Dame in these conferences. If you asked me, and a lot of people have, a few years ago, what do you think of Notre Dame joining the Big Ten? Then I go off on my rant, Fielding Yost blackballed us, 100 years ago, screw them. Then what do you do about USC? All this different stuff. The discussion's changed, Mark. The Big Ten's changed. And now I think you're seeing some Notre Dame people be a lot more open to this idea with the new look Big Ten than we would have been before. And I understand it in a lot of ways. Under the dynamic of what it looks like, Notre Dame should be able to maintain most of their biggest rivalries. USC's the biggest one, and they would be in conference. Michigan, Michigan State, Wisconsin, in-state Purdue, Penn State, all of that. So you would be able to have your rivalries. That's a big deal to Notre Dame. Coast to coast is a big deal. Well, you're going to hit the East Coast. You got South Bend, Chicago, and then you got LA. So you're still able to hit coast to coast, right? Playoff access. We don't know quite what it's all going to look like when this is all done, but you would guarantee yourself you don't have an extra flaming hurdle to clear as an independent to get in. And then, oh, by the way, there's the other fact of making $100 million a year instead of $20 million a year on your TV deal to be able to compete, infrastructure, resources, and all that. So when you look at that dynamic, I philosophically ask, what's Notre Dame really giving up at that point other than the label of being independent? It looks like you could get most of all of the most important stuff to us. You would be able to maintain. And so I think that has people a little more open to this than they would have been before. And then on the other side is it even feasible to stay independent at that point? How would you be able to build a competitive enough schedule? You know, how do you compete making $20 million a year on your TV deal when other teams have 100? So there's some practical things in the way for the maintaining of independence as well. But that USC thing, Mark, that is just dangling right in front of us. Like, that was a big deal. It opens up LA, maintains that, don't have to give them up. That is a big selling point. If I had to guess, Swarbrick, Notre Dame's AD, chills out for a year or two. Let the other pieces move. Let this become more structured. Maybe get information on what the playoff path and access is going to require. Then, at that point, make a decision. And I think, I honestly, I think it might be joining the Big Ten.
Well, I didn't have to necessarily anticipate what you were going to say there. I would have, if gun to my head, I would have thought you were going to cling to the independent status. So I'm not needing to roll out my Notre Dame should join the Big Ten.
Mark, mantra. This is a good deal. Even I miss Captain Independence here. And even I'm looking at it, go, wait a second. What are you really giving up? What are you really giving up? If you could do all those broad, big picture, important Notre Dame things and not give up your identity to do it, I just think the writing's on the wall with where this is all headed, to where if you don't do it because you love it, you might do it because you might just have to do it. You know, either way.
John, what you're going to be giving up is a lot of fights on Twitter, I'm sure, about defending Notre Dame's independent status and why don't you guys join a conference? And
yeah, I'm really going to miss those. You know how many times I have to explain to Michigan people we would already been in that conference if that open, anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant bigot Fielding Yost didn't blackball us. We would already been in that dumb conference for 100 years. So they have nobody to blame but their own on that one.
Yes. So I posted a video on it. I'm sure John has as well. You've heard the spiel from John here, but I'm sure he's got a whole lot more that's on Always Irish, of course, right here on YouTube. So get on over there. And of course, yes, I have posted my video on why Notre Dame should join the Big Ten.
Yeah, I want, trust me, Mark, my initial inclination is to fight this. But when I really look at what's laid out, I do not think you're giving up as much as you would have any other time in history to make this move. I really do. I just think the writing's on the wall.
We have two not necessarily connected sets of teams in college football that are going to be connected over the next several years because of the coaching, power coaching changes over the offseason, where the unthinkable happened, where Oklahoma gets left at the altar and Lincoln Riley leaves town and goes to USC. Same thing happens with Brian Kelly running after millions to go to LSU. And again, Notre Dame fans don't, most of them don't seem to mind to have Marcus Freeman, but there's going to be that comparison going forward for the next decade or so between those two sets of two big name programs. So one eye is always going to be on Baton Rouge and see what's going on down there.
Yeah, I always say, Notre Dame's a must-watch every Saturday. Michigan's a must-watch every Saturday for a very different reason and rooting interest. Now LSU's on the list too. I got to watch every one of these games. This is the most intriguing culture clash I've ever seen. I will say this, Mark. I respect that if Kelly was looking to do this, I respect that he went into the SEC for this and went in there and wants to go against Saban and be in that mix and the big leagues of the big leagues and that division even. I respect that a lot. I mean, the way he did it and left and all that, whatever. But I respect that he wants to be in the mix to that extreme extent against that talent. That culture clash, Kelly being the Boston polished politician, and then the culture down at LSU. Yeah, it's a little tricky, but that might be exactly what both parties need. Maybe that's good for Brian Kelly to have to be out of his comfort zone. And maybe it's good for LSU to have an outsider come in and go, I don't know what you guys are doing, but we're going to do it a little different here, and we're going to see how it goes. So that could be exactly what the doctor ordered for both parties. Here's the one thing I got to push back on, though. This last week, LSU's had a really good recruiting run, and they moved up quite a bit. And I'm already getting the LSU contingent saying, oh, I thought you said you were glad Kelly left because he couldn't recruit. Now what do you say? At Notre Dame. These are different recruiting methodologies. Everything about how you recruit Notre Dame and LSU are worlds apart. Not one's better and one's worse. They are just totally unrelated in how you need to successfully recruit each of these places. It is very possible Brian Kelly recruits the exact same way he did at Notre Dame and gets better results out of it at LSU because of regional talent. Don't have to fly everywhere. Maybe it's easier to get guys in and keep them in school. Their NIL seems a little bit more into it and out front in public than Notre Dame's is. There's a lot of reasons. But if Brian Kelly recruits great at LSU, it's not going to prove that I'm wrong that he didn't do it at Notre Dame. He didn't put in the effort. It's a different job. It requires more to do it right at Notre Dame because there are extra challenges. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be really interesting. Can he get over that hump he couldn't get at Notre Dame? And to do it, look what he has to go through down there in the SEC.
Well, it was the initial impression that I had when I heard the news was this is the oddest of odd couples getting together. Brian Kelly at LSU, that's just the culture clash, as you stated, was just, harsh. But to your other point, organization, structure, off-field discipline, not necessarily strong points of Les Miles and Ed Ogeron and letting players run amok at LSU. So maybe Brian Kelly is what they need there in Death Valley.
Yep. Now, that's the one thing I did tell LSU people. You know, a lot of them didn't even pay that much attention when he was at Notre Dame because it's little old Notre Dame, not in the SEC, you know. Then they had to start paying attention. And I said, Brian Kelly's going to be solid. Like, you're not going to have, like you said, the locker room running wild and all these issues and all. Like, you're not going to have that. Brian Kelly's going to be very stabilizing force. There's going to be a stable culture there, all of that. It's just a matter of, this is LSU. The only thing good enough at LSU is winning that conference. And looking at what we got at Notre Dame, that's where you sit there and go, I can't wait to see how close he gets or if he does this, because it's a tough ask. It's LSU. The only result acceptable is winning that conference. So how long does it take him to, like Freeman's trying to flip that Kelly's roster, for Kelly to do his recruiting thing instill some of his structure. What's that going to look like? I am super intrigued. It's just going to be so weird after a decade plus at Kelly, seeing him at LSU. It's going to be interesting.
John Kennedy, always Irish. Get on over there, folks. Check out what John's got in store for you. You know, he's always animated, always passionate, and he delivers the insight as well. John, we appreciate you being here. It was great to catch up with you.
You as well, Mark. Maybe we'll get together right before the season, or maybe right after Ohio State. Let's reconvene on some of these topics and see how they develop, because I think they're all really interesting storylines to follow.
You betcha. I'm all for it. All right, John.
Beautiful. Thanks, Mark. Take care. Love your program. Great job. Keep growing, my friend.